Countdown to Eternity starts now.
Well, hello, my dear brothers and sisters. I want to welcome you to another episode of Countdown to Eternity. And you might not be able to tell this, but Pastor Tom has to be dead tired. This guy gets on, or what, not even on a plane. You get in a car from Mexico after teaching a prophecy conference 12 hours earlier. You get over here, you get back to where you are, and you just start working.
You know,
Bro, welcome.
You know, the time is short, right? I mean, we don't know how much longer we have. Let's make the best of it. We're going to make our time count. We're moving forward.
I just think it's remarkable. I think it's good. When I get to the super old age that you're at, I hope I can. I can't even keep a straight face and saying that. I'm so terrible. I can't even keep a straight face. Hey, no, you're a fighter, bro. And I got to tell you something. I am very proud of that. I will say that we're living in a world right now where there's a lot of guys, especially in your generation, that are looking for a way out. And you've been spending a lot of your effort looking for a way in to the hotter part. To where the fire is. And I love that, bro. I just think that God is going to reward you and preserve you for it. But yes, I think you're right. You need to get some rest. You got to recharge her. I'm the hypocrite saying that, but yeah.
I was going to say that, but because you are. So, hey, check this out. You ready to roll with some things?
Yeah, let's do this. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So in Brazil, the ex-president Bolsonaro, he's been arrested. And anybody that knows of him, people I know that know him personally say, hey, this guy was totally on fire for the Lord. He's very, very popular with Brazil. You look and you go, there's some things to me that are highly suspicious of this, when it seems like we live in a world where there's political prisoners, and this, to me, is one of the biggest.
So here's the crazy thing with this, bro. And I just hope I don't fly off the handle a little bit on this. We have to be very careful because of the environment that we are broadcasting on to speak about the issues that are directly related to this. But there are some issues that we have to talk about. There are things that we have to bring up. And one of the things that really bothers me is the pattern that I'm beginning to see expanding in North America and actually all over the world, North America, South America, all over the world, where we are jailing and using lawfare against political pundits. It is to the point where the totalitarian mindset that exists amongst all of these leaders around the world is almost like a uniparty kind of a mentality. The idea is, let's end up utilizing whatever leverage we can create to shut people's mouths so that later on we can develop a clearer or more direct path to, in essence, instituting the totalitarian regime that we know is going to exist in the world of the Antichrist. Like, we see this. There's a totalitarianism. This reeks of it. It's ridiculous. And the fact that he's a Christian, and the fact that he loves the Lord, and the fact that we know or understand from what we can see on the outside, he's very principled. Is anybody surprised that this type of thing is happening? I'm not one of these guys that wants to sit here and get on some soapbox over the insanity of all of this, but quite frankly, this is ridiculous. And you're never going to get the one world government mindset unless you think that way. There's no other way to look at it. That's exactly what we're seeing. We are getting closer and closer and closer to the time that the Bible is warning us about. And actually, we're kind of already there. The birth pangs are increasing. It won't be long before we get into that picture where the fig tree generation is going to pop up and watch the Antichrist go into the temple and demand to be worshiped, when the abomination of desolation is witnessed by them. And we know that generation is going to see the second coming of the Lord. And we're getting to that. We're watching the setup begin to happen. And I don't understand why this is so difficult for a lot of people to see, other than there's a spiritual blindness. And the Bible tells us that would be the case as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's several different things you said in there that apply. And you look, it's like, once you see these things, see what we see, you can't unsee them. And it becomes so obvious. It's like, how can people not see it? But spiritual blindness. It was in Daniel chapter 12 where the angel tells Daniel, in that day, the wicked will see it, but they won't understand. The
Yep.
wise, however, will see it and they will understand. The ones who are wise in the word, they're searching the scripture to say, hey, what's going on here? And God will give them clarity. But the thought in there is everybody's going to see it. Everybody's going to know with their physical eyes something isn't right. But those who are not pursuing the word, they're not going to make that connection, and they won't. So they won't understand. That is what the Bible teaches. So when people are saying right now, "Hey, you guys just don't know what you're talking about. Everything's just going on as it is," that's biblical too. Peter said that's what the scoffers will say in the last days. It's business
That's
as
right.
usual. It is not business as usual. When we
That's right.
think, yeah, when we think of the dynamics right now, this isn't rocket science. Satan knows that his man Antichrist, he has only a 7-year window of a kingdom. He doesn't have any more. Satan knows because he can read the word. He knows he's got 7 years. That's short. There's no way that he can let his man Antichrist spend a second building the infrastructure. So the entire infrastructure has to be built. The technology, the minds of people have to be shaped. Um, that's why we see the insanity with these laws and what's happening to gender. You're thinking this doesn't make any sense. Why we are watching and getting used to political prisoners being arrested, especially if they are people who are standing up for what is right. They believe in the Bible, that sort of thing. They're being set aside in our culture. They're not accepted anymore because this whole world has to be conditioned for this before Antichrist arrives on the scene. So it is everything, the geopolitical alignments, the central bank digital currencies. All these dynamics have to take place before Antichrist rises into power.
Yeah, 100%. And the foundation for it is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. And you mentioned something that's very critical that I don't think we talk about enough, but it's good that you mentioned it. And that is there is a global brainwashing that's happening where people are becoming more and more and more comfortable with the technology that we know is going to eventually be used to carry out these totalitarian mechanisms. And the thing that is kind of scary is the type of things that we looked at as taboo or destructive or something that people will never buy into back in the day, even 5 years ago, is something that's becoming very, very accepted and even popular when it comes to Satan worship and these things with the pentagrams now that don't even look like taboo. It's becoming a fashion piece to a lot of people. The mark of the beast is becoming something that's more a tool to get a rise out of people than it is to understand the depth of what it actually means. There's people literally getting tattoos on purpose on their forehead or on their right hand. It's like, what in the world are you thinking? It's like you're rushing yourself into permanent destruction and you're becoming part of a almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. But we should not be surprised when we see these things as the world begins to embrace it and becomes more comfortable with it. That's how we know it's going to happen and how it's going to happen so quickly. And it's being mainstreamed right now, Tommy.
Oh, it totally is. When we're looking at all these different dynamics taking place at the exact same time, and the people's minds are brainwashed, and they think, "Hey, this is a wonderful thing to put a chip under my hand," and they do it in a mocking way, thinking they're on the winning side when they are not. And they have no concept. No, the Bible really is true. These things are going to come back and they're going to haunt every one of them. I got to ask you a question. You mentioned the fig tree generation. So
Yep.
that sparks a lot of a lot of debate with people. What I know you and I think this along the same lines on the fig tree generation, but there are those who say the fig tree is Israel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Wrong.
okay.
Wrong.
I say no. What the illustration Jesus gave is the is if you read all the way through the passage, it's the fig tree and all the trees. When you see all these things begin to take place, then you know that your redemption is near. It's
Yeah.
repeated in all three of the synoptic gospels, all these things, plural. And Jesus just gave the signs of the second coming. And Israel is one of the signs. The biggest sign is Israel. So you have the fig tree
Yeah.
and all the trees. It's at a time when all these things are taking place at the same time. and Israel is gathered back as a nation again. When all these things are taking place, to me, that would be the fig tree generation. We're not counting from 1948 X amount of years. We're recognizing the generation that is witnessing all of these events at the time where you have the abomination of desolation that takes place in the temple.
Yeah, no, we have a very, very serious problem with how the word is being divided right now, and it's not being approached correctly. And I want people to be open-minded about what the Bible says. That tradition cannot be your final arbiter. It's the Bible that needs to be the final court of arbitration. And so when you look at the Bible within its context, you will understand that the illustration of the fig tree has absolutely nothing to do with Israel per se. The understanding that Israel becoming or being reestablished as a nation is an absolute super sign, what I would call it, that shows that the return of Christ is imminent and that we are undoubtedly in the last days. But I will use passages like Ezekiel chapter 37 to give me that, or maybe even Amos chapter 9. But I'm not going to take Matthew chapter 24 as the mechanism that drives that understanding or that approach of the nation of Israel being reestablished. We know that Israel has to be reestablished in order for the end time events and scenarios to take place. And for the last several thousand years, since Israel was in essence pretty much destroyed, and there was no repatriation of the area after Titus in 70 AD, everybody thought that was, an impossibility, to the point where there were a whole group of Christians that were calling themselves spiritual Israel, and the demonic teachings of replacement theology came into play. But when you look at the passage that is in Matthew chapter 24, first of all, Matthew chapter 24 isn't even talking about the rapture. Matthew chapter 24 is not talking about the time period that is before the rapture. Matthew chapter 24 is, let me back up for a second. There are some aspects of Matthew 24 that deal with, the time before the rapture, like the birth pangs and all these things, wars and rumors of wars. They're always going to exist, but that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, look, wars, rumors of wars, all of these things that we see that people are calling these big signs of the end are things that are always going to be a part of what you should be expecting as we get closer to the last days. The picture of birth pangs means that there's going to be a growing frequency of those things, and not just a growing frequency, but the spacing between the times that these things happen will actually grow. If you look at the distance, for example, between World War I and the previous conflicts prior to that time, and then you look at the distance between World War I and World War II, and then you look at the distance between World War II and Korea, and then the distance between Korea and Vietnam, and then from Vietnam, the Desert Storm, and all the other things, the hundreds of proxy wars that are going on and all that kind of stuff. The context of Matthew chapter 24 has everything to do with the second coming, not to be conflated with the rapture. So when Jesus tells us to look at a picture from nature, what he's telling us is look at the fig tree. You know that when the fig tree produces figs, that the season is near. It's a sign. So he says, understanding that, when you see the abomination that causes desolate, as spoken of by the prophet Daniel, which we know is in Daniel chapter 9, when you see that happen, understand this will be the generation that will see the second coming of Christ, not the rapture, the second coming. And by the way, Jesus even said regarding the second coming that nobody will know the day or the hour. And a lot of people come to me and they say, well, James, how could that be the case? If Jesus said no one will know the day or the hour, we know what the exact day and the exact hour is, because from the very moment that the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple and demands to be worshiped, we know there's a 3.5 year period. You can count it down right to the minute, except for one problem. When did the Antichrist actually do that? When he comes out publicly and says he actually did that, did he do that like in reality 3 weeks before? Did he have a private moment when he walked into the temple and demanded to be worshiped? When did he actually do that? The commencement of the actual tribulation itself is based upon the making of a peace treaty. So when did that happen? Was the peace treaty really established before the formal signing? Did it happen in a back alley somewhere in some room where somebody writes it? The point behind it is you are not going to know the day or the hour, because you're not going to know the exact moment that those things actually happened. There's no way you can know. Matter of fact, The Antichrist himself probably won't understand when that moment happened. He might think that the very moment when that was established was the very day he walked to the temple and said, I set myself up. Maybe he didn't realize the fact that the moment he had that thought is when God chose to start the time clock. So the issue here is, even if you are living in the tribulation right now and you are watching the Antichrist sitting in the temple and saying, I demand to be worshiped, make no mistake, you're not going to be able to count 3.5 years exactly and say it'll be on this day or the hour, because guess what? It may happen 3 weeks prior to that. It may happen, a week after. We just don't know, because we don't know when the real actual moment is. So let's take things in context. Instead of going out of our way to make some argument that a fig tree is actually Israel, why don't we actually say or show people the passages where God actually names Israel? Why don't we go to Amos that talks about God regathering the land? Why don't we sit down and have a solid Bible study on what God says in Daniel? Why don't we sit down and have a real conversation about the promises that are made in Ezekiel chapter 37? Why don't we look at what Zechariah chapter 12 says? Why don't we look at Zechariah chapter 14? Why don't we stop and look at real passages that are dealing with the real issue at hand, instead of using all this symbolic terminology? Because there are places that clearly are not indicative of Israel that involve a fig tree in the Bible. So let's just call it for what it is. And I know there will be people that will be very upset with what I'm saying, and I get it. I'm honestly, quite frankly, I'm at the point right now where people can get upset as much as they want. Our obligation is to tell the truth.
Amen.
It's that simple.
So it is. So it is interesting, though, just bringing in an illustration saying, well, look at the fig tree. And immediately people go, he's talking about Israel. It's like God's trying to play tricks or something. No, he's just giving an illustration. But it really is tradition. Here's another one that's tradition. China will have a 200 million man army. I mean, you know how many people are going to get ticked off at this today. Listen, that's another traditional teaching in Bible prophecy, because at one time, I think it was in the 80s or 90s, James, you might remember.
Hal Lindsey made it popular.
Yeah.
It was Hal Lindsey, wasn't it?
It was Hal Lindsey, and then it really caught the fire, got fanned in the Calvary chapels, right?
Yeah.
And I think it came when China announced we could field an army of 200 million soldiers. So
That's
people took that to determine what the Bible meant. Instead of realizing, wait, chapter 9 of Revelation is this, chapter 16 is this, completely separate events. Chapter 9 is about demons. Chapter 16 is no, these are completely separate. They have nothing to do with each other. And there will not be a 200 million man army that comes into the valley of Jezreel Valley, Armageddon. It's an impossibility for various reasons. You and I have talked about that before. The kings of the east will come over dried up Euphrates, but that's east of the Euphrates. That's what it is. And China could be part of it. Could be. But
I mean, Tommy, can we just talk about this for just 1 second? Because let me give you an example of where people make this terrible mistake and continue to make terrible mistakes like this. 200 million man army. We're not talking about a 200 million man army. We are talking about an army of 200 million demons.
That's what it is.
That's what we're talking about. We are talking about a supernatural thing. And let's play the game, because I know you and I know you well, right? What chapters in Revelation are people conflating when they come to that conclusion?
Chapter 9 and chapter 16.
Amen.
Two completely different things. Chapter 16 is at the very end of the tribulation. Chapter 9 is the trumpet judgment, sixth trumpet judgment. They're not the same. Chapter 16 is game over at that point. The armies of the kings of the world gather together at this place in Hebrew called Armageddon. Again, Jezreel Valley. Listen, this is where Antichrist and false prophet are going to get destroyed and cast into the lake of fire. But you look at this and go, stop confusing, taking two unrelated events and putting them together. But it's tradition, just like the fig tree. It's tradition.
Yeah. I mean, bro, let's talk about this for a second, because let's talk about how people completely just come to the wrong conclusions with the scriptures, right? Should we go over some history and point out where people have made some serious errors? How about we talk about the 10 nation confederation that so many people were talking about, right? We know that there are going to be 10 kings, and we know exactly what's going to happen. World War II takes place. Winston Churchill in 1946 declares that the tragedy of Europe could only be solved or could only be fixed by creating what he called a United States of Europe, right? So in 1948, I think it was a couple of years later, you had the Benelux Conference. You remember that? And if you remember the story of the Benelux Conference, that's when Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium, which, by the way, that's what Benelux refers to, comes together for what was referred to as the European Economic Community. In 1957, there was a treaty that was signed on one of the hills of Rome. I believe it was called the the Capitoline Hill. I believe that's the one, or the Capitol Hill, something like that. It's one of the 7 hills on Rome, where basically there's an agreement that gets put together called the Treaty of Rome, and all of a sudden people are beginning to open up their eyes and see that something is happening, and that's when the formation of the European Economic Community actually takes place. 1973, let's get the facts straight, right? What happens in 1973? England, Ireland, Denmark join the European Economic Community. 1981, Greece joins the European Economic Community. And when Greece joined the European Economic Community in 1981, you'll remember this. I was a little boy when it happened. People started pooping their pants. They started losing their mind, because when Greece joined the economic community, the European Economic Community, what happened? It completed the 10-nation confederation, and everybody said that Jesus was going to come back in 1988, and they said it was going to happen, all of this stuff. And then in 1986, their world was rocked when Spain and Portugal were added. And then in 1989, Berlin was dismantled. The wall in Berlin was dismantled. The Soviet Union was dismantled. The expansion of NATO was promised that it wouldn't happen. And then we began to see all kinds of other nations join the EEC, right? Austria, Finland, Sweden, and all the other countries that came with that. Before you know it, it was Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, all became members of the European Union. And pretty much it grew and grew and grew and grew, and it actually became bigger than North America. I mean, think about that for a second.
No.
So now what are the people going to say that came to that conclusion? Then it becomes the European Union. And now it's something that is so big that most people can't even understand. Now, I will say, in all fairness, there's a discussion of consolidation that's going on.
Sure.
But the problem is people decided to take different passages in the Bible and conflate them together to produce a very traditional idea about what was going to happen, not understanding what the Bible was saying with respect to what was going to take place with these 10 kings. And that's a problem.
So it is a problem, because I remember sitting under certain teaching back then, and
I know.
And I was a prophecy guy. I mean, this is way back. This is almost 40 years ago. But I remember
I used to listen to the tapes, bro.
It, right?
Yep.
And then I remember there's 12 nations in the EU. Then there's 13. Then there's 14. And I started thinking, hey, this isn't it. But people were still claiming it was. I'm going, there's something wrong with this. There's something wrong with this math, or just jumping to a conclusion. So we have these things, tradition. However, I will say this, which I know you agree with me. It was the Club of Rome. They've had the world divided into 10 different regions. And we've seen maps like that. Throughout history, there's been maps similar. It is interesting, 10 regions. But I will give this to you, because you and I have had kind of an argument on this a couple of years ago. I will give this to you. I do believe the power brokers in this 10 world, I think it's going to be a 10 world region, a 10 region world, like James Vernon McGee used to say. But yep. I do believe the power brokers are going to be in Europe. And I do believe Antichrist is going to be rising out of Europe. So
Rome, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you can really see it shaping up with the way Europe is going with their politics, and the way the U.S. is, and so much more because of the tech world and all these different things. It's all going to Europe. Europe is going to be the one. Somehow, though, there's going to be this massive army that Antichrist is going to have. Who knows? He may swallow up the U.S. army or something like that. May come under his U.S. military, I should say, not army. But I do believe it will be consolidated in Europe, but it will be the globe broken down into 10 regions.
Yeah, and I think it kind of has to be, okay, because of the use of the terminology that's being projected in the Bible, it has to be something very similar to that. Definitely, I'm very adamant about the idea that it's going to be centralized in Europe. Very much, I think it's coming out of Rome. And here's another thought behind this: when we read passages like the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has in Daniel chapter 2, and we get into Daniel chapter 7. What's really interesting is when you look at the predictions of how these nations happen, right? Look at the statue that we read in Daniel chapter 2, for example, and you get the gold and the silver and the bronze and the iron, and then the iron mixed with clay. You can see the progression taking place. You can see the Babylonian Empire. You can see the Medo-Persian Empire coming after that. You can see the Grecian Empire, and then you can see what looks like a stronger formation that kind of morphs into what is the Roman Empire. And then when you get into the iron mixed with clay, isn't it interesting to think that the Roman Empire never was destroyed? It just kind of faded. It sort of was diminished. And there's always been a remnant of the Roman Empire that sort of floated around. And now, in the same way that the Roman Empire was diminished, did you notice that it's kind of like a reversal? Like almost if you played the recording backwards, you would, it looks like that's what's happening.
It does.
It looks like that's what's happening. So it's the appearance of strength being built upon feet that are mixed with clay.
Yeah, iron
is going to break.
Yeah,
it's going to fall apart.
It is going to fall apart. There's too many challenges with it. Here's something else that's interesting. World leaders have known. I mean, go back to Rome. You can look at Babylon, Assyria. Every world leader in the past has known that nationalism is always a problem in the sense like we think, because people by nature, if you're Italian, you're Italian. If you're Mexican, you're Mexican. If you're Egyptian, you're Egyptian. People, you have that in you. You can't take certain things away. So the globalists, when they attempt this, are going to have a problem regardless. It's going to be iron mixed with clay. These two things don't mix. The Roman Empire knew it. The Babylonians knew it. The Assyrians knew it. And that's why they had to change languages. That's why they had to take people out of their country and try to bring them into the Babylonian system. But even at that, the Jews were still Jews. Even with Assyria, although you ended up with the Samaritans, they still knew they were half Jew and half whatever else. But every culture's
100%.
been that way. The Romans totally understood this. And that's why the Romans actually attempted to let the people live in their land like they did with Israel or other people until they decided we've had enough and take them slaves.
Yeah, and you're right. And it's interesting bringing up Winston Churchill right before Benelux. One of the things that he did in that year in 1946 was he in essence condemned individual nationalism that existed within the countries. Although he believed in a patriotic mindset, he said that he needed to, the idea was to take the nationalistic feelings that were often associated with the country that people were in and create a new nationalism. And that nationalism would be a European nationalism. And that's actually where the EEC came from. I mean, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. And Benelux kind of, solidified that. But that's where it all started.
Yeah.
And so we're beginning to move in that direction. There's like a new flavor of nationalism that exists. We're seeing it. We're watching it happening right now.
So spot on. We're watching the formation of this. Like you said, it's playing the record in reverse as the Roman Empire is getting revived. That's what that is happening. That's what the Bible tells us. That fourth beast, the huge iron beast of Daniel chapter 7, it never went away. When you read Daniel chapter 7, you see it morph into this final world empire. We are experiencing right now this morphing of that fourth beast into what is coming with the 10 kings, Daniel 7 says, and then Antichrist will be there. Hey, we're out of time.
We are, dude. I cannot believe it. We're way out of time. Okay, I'm going to give you the last word, bro, and then we'll tap out for this week. We've got a discussion on AI coming for next week. That's going to be a really great one. But any final words?
Yeah, I was gonna mention what we're going to talk about next time because Mark Zuckerberg, he is challenging tech companies, apparently. Now, this is on the surface. You and I both just think that's not the case, but he's claiming they are trying to play God. Well, we know it's
Yeah.
true. They're trying to play God, but isn't he also trying to play God? So that's
Oh
for
no, he
next week.
thinks he is God.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah.
thinks he is. That's going to be an
I think
interesting conversation.
I think that's what he is. He's really jealous that they might get the upper hand when he wants to be God. But we'll look at
Yep.
that. But it is what the
Yep.
companies are doing. But anyways, listen, everyone, you must keep your eyes looking up and lift up your head because your redemption draws near. We see all of these things coming together. It's not a coincidence, but man, we are watching the demise of America at the formation of this revived Roman Empire, but our hope is in Jesus. And that's what we need to
Amen.
remember. Hope isn't in the political leader, or hope isn't in whatever. Our citizenship is in heaven, and Jesus is getting ready to call us home.
Amen, bro. And I could not agree with you more. And I can tell you this, tomorrow I'm going to release a video where I am teaching through Daniel chapter 2, and we're going to talk about this revived Roman Empire. I'm really excited about that. I recorded that a few weeks ago, and we're going to drive that in. And I know that you are doing a lot of material on this. Some of the interviews and things you've done lately are just really great. So with that, guys, we love you. On behalf of Tom Hughes, we just want to tell you that we're grateful for the fact that you are listening to us on the radio all over the country, all over the world. We just heard recently from a few people in Australia and New Zealand that are listening to us on the radio. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're so grateful for you. And we're just excited about what the Lord has for us. We understand that we are undoubtedly in the last days. We are approaching that time. We need to keep our eyes open, and we want to thank you. We hope you enjoyed listening to this or watching it as much as we've enjoyed making it. May God richly bless you as we continue to count down to eternity. God bless you.